Hello. Me doing that like I think my hair's gonna look better. Yeah, I realise I talk about my hair far too much in these videos, so we're gonna stop. I really could, last thing though, I really could do with getting my roots done at some point, but that's not gonna happen. But yeah, what a good idea to start dyeing my hair blonde. I did it before Christmas, but still, it's like, not the best, but never mind. Yeah, anyway, I was rabbiting on already. I hope you're doing okay. I'm really tired today. Yeah, I didn't sleep much last night. This is probably too much information, but I've had a really upset stomach, which I sometimes get when I'm anxious. I left the house yesterday to get one of my dad's prescriptions. So I just want to say, yeah, a big thank you to all the NHS staff and the incredible work you're doing. But yeah, I feel more normal, I think, when I'm at home. When I'm out, because you're kind of aware of people being around you and the threat, not that they're threatening, that's not what I mean, but it's, yeah, the idea of COVID-19 and wanting to stay away. And I made sure I kind of antibac my hands a lot of times when I was in there, and then washed them a lot when I came back. But yeah, it's just, you guys all know, it's just a stressful time. And yeah, to shout out as well to yeah, all the people that are working or not able to work. I know how privileged I am that I have a permanent contract and that I'm able to work from home, and I have such a really lovely supportive team. I know my sister, who's a freelancer, as a freelance photographer, hasn't had any work coming in for like 3 weeks, so yeah, it's it's a difficult time for everybody really. But yeah, so I'm just going to dive straight into chapter 3, just because I'm filming this on my lunch break, because I think after work I'm just going to go sleep. I know there's people having a lot more of kind of a stressful, busy time than I am, but yeah, this is just how I'm feeling. So yeah, and I hope you guys are doing okay. If you want to reach out to me, I said I'm Hannah_Squire on Instagram. I'm on Twitter too. I think I'm Hannah R Squire on there, or kind of here in the comments. Yeah, thank you for watching. So, chapter 3 of The Lady Vanishes. All the chapters are pretty short generally, Lina White's work, so which is great for this format. So yeah, chapter 3, Conversation Piece. When the honeymoon pair returned to the hotel, the 4 remaining guests were sitting outside on the gravelled square before the veranda. They were enjoying the restful interlude of Between the Lights. It was too dark to write letters or read, too early to dress for dinner. Empty cups and cake crumbs on one of the tables showed that they had taken afternoon tea in the open and had not moved since. It was typical of 2 of them, the Mrs. Flood Porter, to settle. They were not the kind that flitted being in the 50s, and definitely set in their figures and their habits. Both had immaculately waved grey hair, which retained sufficient samples of the original tint to give them the courtesy title of blondes. They had also in common excellent natural complexions and rather fierce expressions. The delicate skin of the elder, Miss Evelyn, was slightly shrivelled, for she was nearly 60, while Miss Rose was only just out of the 40s. The younger sister was taller and stouter, her voice was louder, her colour deeper. In an otherwise excellent character was a streak of amiable bully, which made her inclined to scold her partner at contract. During their visit they had formed a quartet with the Reverend Kenneth Barnes and his wife. They had travelled out on the same train, and they planned to return to England together. The vicar and his wife had the gift of pleasant companionship, which the Mrs. Flood Porter, who were without it, attributed to mutual tastes and prejudices. The courtyard was furnished with iron chairs and tables, enamelled in brilliant colours, and was decorated with tubs of dusty evergreen shrubs. As Miss Flood Porter looked around her, she thought of her own delightful home in a cathedral city. According to the papers, there had been rain in England, so the garden should look its best, with vivid green grass and lush borders of asters and dahlias. "I'm looking forward to seeing my garden again," she said. "Ours," corrected the sister, who was John Blunt. "And I'm looking forward to a comfortable chair," laughed the vicar. "Ha, here comes the bridal pair." In spite of a sympathetic interest in his fellows, he did not call out a genial greeting. He had learned from his first and final rebirth that they resented any intrusion on their privacy. So he leaned back, puffing at his pipe, while he watched them mount the steps of the veranda. "Handsome pair," he said in an approving voice. "I wonder who they really are," remarked Miss Flood Porter. "The man's face is familiar to me. I know I've seen him somewhere." "On the pictures, perhaps," suggested her sister. "Oh, do you go?" broke in Mrs. Barnes eagerly, hoping to claim another taste in common, for she concealed a guilty passion for the cinema. "I'll need to see George Arliss and Diana Wynyard," explained Miss Flood Porter. "That settles it," said the vicar. "He's certainly not George Arliss, and neither is he Diana." "All the same, I feel certain there is some mystery about them," persisted Miss Flood Porter. "So do I," agreed Mrs. Barnes. "I wonder if they are really married." "Are you?" asked her husband quickly. He laughed gently when his wife flushed to her eyes. "Sorry to startle you, my dear," he said, "but isn't it simpler to believe that we all of us are what we assume to be, even parsons and their wives?" He knocked the ashes out of his pipe and rose from his chair. "I think I'll stroll down to the village for a chat with my friends." "How can he talk to them when he doesn't know their language?" demanded Miss Rose bluntly, when the vicar had gone from the garden. "Oh, he makes them understand," explained his wife proudly. "Sympathy, you know, and common humanity. He'd rub noses with a savage." I just quickly want to do another interlude, just quickly to one side. So obviously, the use of the word savage is awful, and this book is very much, it's written in the 1930s. It's set then. The prejudices of the time included in this book. I don't want to kind of whitewash the book at all, to whitewash the time, obviously not. And this is also in the voice of a character, a prejudiced character. So yeah, I will use that word, though I'm not comfortable with it, but I will use that word. So anyway, carry on. "I'm afraid we drove him away by talking scandal," said Miss Flood Porter. "It was my fault," declared Mrs. Barnes. "I know people think I'm curious, but really I have to force myself to show an interest in my neighbours' affairs. It's my protest against our terrible national shyness." "We're proud of that," broke in Miss Rose. "England does not need to advertise." "Of course not, but we only passed this way once. I have to remind myself that the stranger sitting beside me may be in some trouble and that I might be able to help." The sisters looked at her with approval. She was a slender woman in her mid-40s with a pale oval face, dark hair and a sweet expression. Her large brown eyes were both kind and frank, her manner sincere. It was impossible to connect her with anything but rigid honesty. They knew that she floundered into awkward explanations rather than run the risk of giving a false impression. In her turn, she liked the sisters. They were of solid worth and sound respectability. One felt that they would serve on juries with distinction and do their duty to their God and their neighbour, while permitting no direction as to its nature. There were also leisured people with a charming house and gardens, well-trained maids and frozen assets in the bank. Mrs. Barnes knew this, so being human, it gave her a feeling of superiority to reflect that the one man in their party was her husband. She could appreciate the sense of ownership, because up to her 40th birthday, she had gone on her yearly holiday in the company of a huddle of other spinsters. As a 29-year-old spinster myself. Oh, just that word. Oh, hilarious. Okay, so since she had left school, she had earned her living by teaching until the miracle happened which gave her not only a husband, but a son. Both she and her husband were so wrapped up in the child that the vicar sometimes feared that their devotion was tempting fate. The night before they set out on their holiday, he proposed a pact. "Yes," he agreed, looking down at the sleeping boy in his cot. "He is beautiful, but it is my privilege to read the commandments to others. Sometimes I wonder—" "I know what you mean," interrupted his wife. "Idolatry." He nodded. "I am as guilty as you," he admitted, "so I mean to discipline myself. In our position we have special opportunities to influence others. We must not grow lopsided, but develop every part of our nature. If this holiday is to do us real good, it must be a complete mental change. My dear, suppose we agree not to talk exclusively of Gabriel while we are away." Mrs. Barnes agreed, but her promise did not prevent her from thinking of him continually. Although they had left him in the care of a competent grandmother, she was foolishly apprehensive about his health. While she was counting the remaining hours before her return to her son, and Miss Flood Porter smiled in anticipation of seeing her garden, Miss Rose was pursuing her original train of thought. She always ploughed a straight furrow right to its end. "I can't understand how anyone can tell a lie," she declared, "unless perhaps some poor devil who's afraid of being sacked. But people like us. We know a wealthy woman who boasts of making false declarations at the customs. Sheer dishonesty." As she spoke, Iris appeared at the gate of the hotel garden. She did her best to skirt the group at the table, but she could not avoid hearing what was said. "Perhaps I should not judge others," remarked Mrs. Barnes in the clear, carrying voice of a form mistress. "I've never felt the slightest temptation to tell a lie." Liar, thought Iris automatically. She was in a state of utter fatigue which bordered on collapse. It was only by the exercise of her atom of willpower that she forced herself to reach the hotel. The ordeal had strained her nerves almost to breaking point. Although she longed for the quiet of her room, she knew she could not mount the stairs without a short rest. Every muscle felt wrenched as she dropped down on an iron chair and closed her eyes. "Oh, Iris, I'm not lost, but I can appreciate how knackered you are. If anyone's..." That was me. Yeah, you knew that. So, back to text. "If anyone speaks to me, I'll scream," she thought. The Mrs. Flood Porter exchanged glances and turned down the corner of their mouths. Even gentle Mrs. Barnes' soft brown eyes held no welcome, for she'd been a special victim of the crowd's bad manners and selfishness. They behaved as though they'd bought the hotel and the other guests were interlopers, exacting preferential treatment and getting it by bribery. This infringement of fair dealing annoyed the other tourists, as they adhered to the terms of their payment to a travelling agency, which included service. The crowd monopolised the billiard table and secured the best chairs. They were always served first at meals, courses gave out, and bathwater ran lukewarm. Even the vicar found that his charity was strained. He did his best to make allowance for the animal spirits of youth, although he was aware that several among the party could not be termed juvenile. Unfortunately, Iris's so-called friends, including two persons who were no testimonial for the English nation, and since it was difficult to distinguish one girl in a bathing brief from another, Mrs. Barnes was of the opinion that they were all doing the same thing, getting drunk and making love. Her standards of decency was offended by the sunbathing, her nights disturbed by noise. Therefore she was especially grateful for the prospect of 2 peaceful days spent amid glorious scenery and in congenial company. But apparently there was not a complete clearance of the crowd. There was a hangover in this girl, and there might be others. Mrs. Barnes had vaguely remarked to Iris, because she was pretty, and had been pursued by a bathing gentleman with a matronly figure. As the man was married, his selection was not to her credit, but she seemed to be so exhausted that Mrs. Barnes' kindly heart soon reproached her for lack of sympathy. "Are you left all alone?" she called in her brightest tones. Iris shuddered at the unexpected overture. At that moment, the last thing in the world she wanted was mature interest, which in her experience masked curiosity. "Yes," she replied. "Oh dear, what a shame. Aren't you lonely?" "No, but you're rather young to be travelling without friends. Couldn't any of your people come with you?" "I have none." "No family at all?" "No, and no relatives. Aren't I lucky?" Iris was not near enough to hear the horrified gasp of the Mrs. Flood Porter, but Mrs. Barnes' silence told her that her snub had not miscarried. To avoid a further inquisition, she made a supreme effort to rise, for she was stiffening in every joint, and managed to drag herself into the hotel and upstairs to her room. Mrs. Barnes tried to carry off the incident with a laugh. "I'm afraid I've blundered again," she said. "She plainly resented me, but it seemed hardly human for us to sit like dummies and show no interest in her." "Is she interested in you?" demanded Miss Rose, "or in us? That sort of girl is utterly selfish. She wouldn't raise a finger or go an inch out of her way to help anyone." There was only one answer to the question, which Mrs. Barnes was too kind to make, so she remained silent, since she could not tell a lie. Neither she nor anyone else could foretell the course of the next 24 hours, when this girl, standing alone against a cloud of witnesses, would endure such anguish of spirit as threatened her sanity on behalf of a stranger for whom she had no personal feeling, or rather, if there was actually such a person as Miss Froy. Another chapter read. I was actually going to, at the end, kind of say that that's kind of really foreshadowing what's going to happen, but Ethelina White did it for me. So yeah, that chapter kind of really starts to show more of the sort of dynamics between the characters. So yeah, I'm really tired, so I'm going to go now. But I hope you like that sort of, that's probably, well, if you didn't, the fact that you're still here at 14 and a half minutes, yeah, says something about you. More so than me. But yeah, anyway, losing the power to say words. So yeah, look after yourselves. I'm really knackered. I'm going to go and just chill after work and try and meditate a bit more. Because yeah, I'm definitely feeling a little bit more anxious again today. But yes, I hope you have a a restful, relaxing, peaceful, as fun as it can be, as joyful as it can be, evening and weekend. I might come back and do another chapter tomorrow. Hopefully this video won't take long to be uploaded. So yeah, lovely to speak to you, and yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye guys.